What's up, everybody? So, GW has really recently, as of this ramble, announced their game plan, if you will, for codices for 8th edition of 40k. As pretty much everybody knows, when 8th edition first came out, we got the index books along with it because we had no codex to speak of. Remember, this edition of 40k is incompatible with any edition prior, so there was no codex to speak of for any force. The indexes were band-aids, and they were basically told or called that from the get-go, you could say. We were properly informed about the indexes, so I can't complain about them. I think they did a good job with that. So they were never meant to be the long-term solution, just a short-term band-aid to get you playing and get you learning. The Codex is going to be the big shebang for every force, as it's been in 40k. We just didn't know exactly when or how GW is going to handle Codex releases. So now we have an idea. We have some sort of plan in place from GW for doing this, and it's a little bit ambitious, but I don't think it borders on the realm of feeling rushed necessarily. Assuming, of course, that they have been developing the Codex or the codices in question for longer than we've known about the plan, which I assume so. They have stated how their playtesters and their editing and all that have been in overdrive, so they've been working on stuff for some time now, you could say, codex-wise. But basically, the reason I feel it's still a little bit ambitious is we're looking at them wanting to produce 10 codices by Christmas time. That's basically roughly 2 codices a month if they start in the July time period, which I think they will. So it quickly becomes 2 to 2 plus codices a month, like a 2 point something, if you will, mathematically, if they don't start until August. So it's a pretty ambitious plan for that. And my concern with it is not so much a rushed feel for a force. I really don't have that concern, to be honest. It's more of Limelight not being given its proper due for each force. It's like, and this week we release the whatever faction. Join us next week as we release this faction. And it's like, well, let's hype up the other faction a little bit. There's no time. We don't have time to do that. So that's my concern part there. Is like, the one thing I liked about Codex releases in the past was a bit of a hype factor you got from a Codex getting its proper due, its proper limelight. There was a period of time when GW was releasing codices pretty hard and fast, and it did take away from the limelight a bit. So we're probably going to see that happen just due to the nature of it. But I think ultimately it'll be okay for the forces to get codices quicker rather than taking longer. The thing that I really hope they take a nice look at is what factions can be put back together in one book, if you will, or which ones would make sense to become less books, one bigger codex as opposed to being numerous few codices. A good example is the Mechanicum with the Mechanicus Codex and the Scutari Codex. I felt from the get-go they shouldn't have been separate. They should have been one bigger book with better synergy. And I'm hoping that they did that for when they get released. I'm hoping they realize that folly, if you will. And for this edition, I hope they really put the work in to make them into one faction. One overarching faction with one big book. The reason I say that is there's close to 30 codices, if you will, in 40k at the moment. Or in 7th edition, I should say. There was close to 30 codices, which is ridiculous. That's a lot. And we already know that the Death Guard are going to get their own codex, and the Thousand Sons and pretty much everything that had a codex now is probably going to keep their codex. So that number is just going to get bigger because of the Death Guard and who knows what else perhaps in the works in the future. So anywhere they can combo things up where it makes sense, such as the Mechanicum, is just one less codex total number to worry about. Another faction or factions where this makes sense is Custodian Guard and Sisters of Silence. they never really got proper codices per se in terms of physical books unless you bought the box set called Talons of the Emperor. And considering how Forgel was the first one to give us fluff and stuff for these forces, and they called them Talons of the Emperor together, GW's box set refers to them as Talons of the Emperor together. When their stuff comes to get done up and sold and for this 8th edition, I'm hoping they get one bigger codex with synergy and the capability to build, dedicated force of Custodian Guard or Sisters of Silence, but just call the book Talons of the Emperor and put them together in it. Again, helping to stabilize the codex count. From there, you can look at other forces and make other cases for some things, but those are my two big examples, and from there, how GW would decide to handle certain things, Xenos or Imperial or Chaos or otherwise. Well, there really is no otherwise there, but you get my point. If they handle it in the same manner, as long as it's not silly and it makes sense, like it makes sense lore-wise and fluff-wise, like yes, this the mechanical stuff makes sense because the Skitarii are the Mechanicum's chamber militant, if you will, and of course they'd fight alongside other Mechanicus military stuff. Makes sense there. Putting together, for example, Orcs and Eldar wouldn't make any sense in the one codex, and they're not going to do that. These are going to be codices like we've come to expect. I just think where certain forces can be one bigger book rather than two or so smaller books, because this makes sense, is where they should hopefully really do that. So that's my little ramble, little rant there, if you will, on that concept. Because even at 10 codices in roughly 5 to 6 months, that means in a year's time, we probably still going to have a few codices that need to get done. Unfortunately, I'm guessing one of them is going to be the Adeptus Ministorum, which houses the Sisters of Battle. So I do believe they'll get a book. I do believe they'll get a plastic range, hopefully. I mean, now's the time. If that doesn't happen now, I really question GW's motives with the Sisters if they're not getting a plastic range for this edition. When that codex comes out, however, is an entirely different story. So the reason I got on that tangent is because even given a 5 or 6 months timeline, we're roughly around a third or a little bit more than a third of the way through the codices, which means we're not going to potentially be done in a year's time with all the codices as it sits now. So we still won't be if you combo things up with like the Mechanicus and the Skitarii and the Sisters of Silence and the Custodian Guard, but it'll be closer, that much closer by one, if you will. And it would also help stabilize should they flesh out Chaos with even more codices after the Death Guard one. So that's my thoughts there in terms of their timeline for doing it and based on their planning. It's ambitious, it's interesting. It speaks of prep time, which is a good thing in my opinion, and I do look forward to it. I like how they've basically been drilling the point home that this is how you're going to be able to properly represent your force. This is where the fluff and the lore is going to be spelled out for you, expanded upon, and this is where you're going to feel it proper in your army, and I like that. So who knows when we're going to see, it may even be this coming weekend, we see the first codex, which I believe is going to be Space Marines, because who didn't see that coming? Go up for pre-order, and who knows what might go with it. And only time will tell past that what's going to be down the pipeline after the fact, if it is put up for pre-order this early. If not, then we'll just have to wait and see, and then once it happens, we can start kicking off the timeline of codex releases and speculation onto what codex and when and what have you. Anyways, that's my thoughts. Just thought I'd share it with you since this is pretty big knowledge bomb drop from GW, if you will. I look at it, I like it. I'm looking forward to seeing the Space Marine Codex. That's when I'll pick up. I'll pick up the Dark Angels whenever that comes out, because the Dark Angels, the Space Wolves, the Blood Angels, the Grey Knights, and I assume Death Watch, because I forget if it's said in the article, but they're all going to be represented in their own codices still. So there's no worries there, and I'm really curious to see the representation when it comes, particularly for the Dark Angels, but curious all around, I suppose. Anyways, that's it. Thanks for sticking through it. Any questions, comments, or requests, leave it in the comment section. And until the next one, take it easy.